you. Thanks, Zoom lady.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, thanks everybody. I'm going to time myself. Yeah, give it a hand for Boris. Thank you, Boris. All right. Thank you everybody for venturing through the rain and Saturday morning bed to escaping the bed to come here today. So I'm going to give about a 30-minute talk about transformative digital solidarity, network organizing for a pluriversal distributed web. And I'll unpack all the terms, this word salad here. I'm going to bum you out a little bit, remind you of the stakes of our current reality, and then talk about some of the strategies that I use as a digital organizer to try and make the world better through the digital commons. So that's me when I'm 4 years old, putting my face up against the glass. I feel like I'm not personally a technologist. I obviously dabble in a lot of things, but I'm not a programmer or engineer. But I press my face into the glass of the tech industry to try and observe what is going on and try and improve things. So I've been doing technology and social justice work since my undergrad days at UC Santa Cruz. There's a program there called the Everett Program that trains undergrads to use tech skills and embed themselves in nonprofits and other collectives and improve their tech capacity. And then I went from there to EFF. I was there for 5 years doing international intellectual property policy, chasing around trade negotiators, trying to make the internet not worse through their shopping the DMCA, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, around the world, particularly to developing countries where a lot of content is already very restricted. That's the short story of that. If you want to hear more about how trade agreements are making the internet worse around the world through copyright, I can talk your ear off about that. But once I was doing that, I was like, God, the trade negotiators and policymakers only listen to tech companies and Hollywood. Hollywood because, you know, obviously they make a lot of money, they produce a lot of GDP for the country. And so when, you know, EFF and Public Citizen and any other public interest group was talking about trying to protect users' interests and librarians' interests and people with disabilities, students, artists, hackers, they were like, well, you know, well, these companies are asking for us for these policies, so why, like, we're not going to listen to you. And so I kind of felt like my face was like smashing against the glass at this point. And so I was like, okay, I think there just needs to be kind of a whole new paradigm around this. And so I started thinking about the solidarity economy and commoning and seeing how there are other ways to make innovation and technology development happen that is not capitalist. So sort of fast forward, I went and worked with a community mesh network in Oakland for a while to really understand how we can have a more democratized last mile infrastructure to now I work with Distributed Press and Compost, which is a project to build tooling for publishing on various other protocols, including IPFS, Hypercore, and in the future, hopefully BitTorrent. My main hat that I wear is as the senior organizer with DWeb, which is a project out of the Internet Archive to improve digital infrastructure for connectivity. And that's a very broad umbrella term, but we kind of look at all layers of the network stack and think about how organizationally or on a protocol level, on a storage level, can that infrastructure, both human and non-human, be decentralized. I truly think that the internet, Papua internet, is parasitic. This is a kudzu plant that has taken over this entire forest. Yeah, I mean, if you look at the major platforms, I know a lot of us here are using, you know, ActivityPub and other kinds of like more digital sovereignty allowing tools. But for most people on the internet, they have no autonomy over how these platforms are designed, where their data goes, how it's processed. The platforms are designed to make us feel alone and alienated, feel FOMO, make us addicted and angry. Like all of these things are by design. They're by design to, yeah, make us online as much as possible and not actually build bottom-up power to make us feel like we all need to be online to feel connection when the connection itself makes us all feel terrible. And not only that, you know, people who are talking about issues that are not popular or not aligned with either governments or the companies, you know, talking about what's going on in Palestine, people's bodily autonomy in the United States, any kind of thing where it's controversial, you can get deplatformed or censored. So, you know, it's not great. And yeah, and I guess one other thing I'll say is, you know, the internet also has so much capital to pump into it that we have a certain idea of what digital networks are supposed to look like and feel like. And there's such a clean, frictionless user experience for all of these things, so that when people try out, I think, alternatives, it's like, oh, you know, this isn't working, this is hard, and like people kind of don't give a lot of patience. But I think we need to be patient with ourselves because, you know, they have so much money to do user experience and user design and you know, keep their services up. And that's because we are the business model and they don't want us to escape their platforms. I don't think it's a coincidence that out of the top richest people on this planet, 8 of them are tech CEOs based in the United States, and are white men. And this is a graphic that I really love to show that 1 grain of rice is $100,000. Then that is $1 million as a tiny little pinch of rice. This is $1 billion, and that is $122 billion, which is just like a pile of rice. And that was Jeff Bezos' wealth in February 2020. Now he's the 2nd richest person on the planet, and it's about 50% larger now, his wealth. Elon Musk is right under him, about the same amount of wealth. I just checked on Forbes.com yesterday to see what their wealth was. And yeah, I mean, really, it's really telling that 8 out of the 10 top richest people are tech CEOs because of, again, the internet is parasitic and it's extracting all this profit and attention from all of us. And then at the same time, a majority of us, 78% of people in the United States live paycheck to paycheck, which is insane. And at the same time, many tech layoffs are happening, right? There's so much fear about AI taking over jobs. The writer's strike that happened here in Hollywood that lasted, I think, about 5 months. A large part of that was about AI, and the fact that, you know, they are afraid, the writers are afraid that their jobs could be taken by artificial intelligence and, you know, scripts that are just kind of generated from these machines. And it's like, why are we even competing with machines? You know, it's just like, it's ridiculous that we as humans are afraid that of our survival, when it's like the tools should be working for us. And I think we should just be reminded that the fact that we're afraid of machines taking over our livelihoods is just is the fact that the companies just have so much power welded over us. So I always like to just like remind myself that tech is never neutral. I think internet infrastructure is really good at sort of obfuscating all aspects of like the design decisions, the ways in which they are stewarding the networks, the way everything's enforced is like supposedly, you know, objective, right? The cloud, you know, is not a cloud. It's like actual servers that are very, very hot, that require a lot of water or air to flow through them in big warehouses and places around the world. The cloud is like the heaviest thing, actually, you know, part of the internet. And I think these terms actually just like make it so that we aren't really able to engage with what we're up against and kind of like challenge what these network infrastructure can be otherwise. And, you know, if tech is not neutral, then I think we should just say, hey, let's make it for these, you know, express purposes for giving ourselves autonomy to actually address and recognize the challenges in our world. And there's obviously plenty of challenges to address. And so the way I like to think about network technology, sometimes, you know, I'm very online too, but like I just sometimes want to throw my laptop at the wall and like, why am I on my computer all day, all week? And I'm just like, okay, the reason why I think network technologies are so important for solving other issues is that it can be like our nervous system. Or that it is like a nervous system, I think in the best cases, right? Like YouTube, TikTok, Tumblr, you name it, like all the things that we love and like, you know, just kind of like look at and chuckle to ourselves, or, you know, get inspired by is art. It's pleasurable, it's fun, it's things that kind of actually show that we have a common humanity. And so there's like, it's kind of, you know, it feels positive, right? But then it also should be able to properly identify the ways in which we're experiencing pain and suffering as humanity. And I think currently, because of how our infrastructure is designed, we're not actually able to understand and see what pain is occurring in our societies, right? And so I think our nervous system, I like to think that, yeah, it's almost like our nervous system itself is broken. So I think currently in a lot of ways, the internet is like digitally colonizing. In that sense, what I mean is that all the benefits are being extracted from people and being concentrated into the hands of a very few people. And I think we need to move away from the internet being this all-encompassing, you know, just demoralizing system to a digital pluriverse. And what is a pluriverse? So it's the idea that there could be many worlds existing at the same time. There's a Zapatista quote, specifically that it's a world where many worlds fit. And it's the idea that, again, you can imagine that you have your own reality, your own world, your own experience, but that there's other ones. And you can actually support those alongside, you know, creating and cultivating your own world. And a place where I was really introduced to this idea was this project called Digital Pluriverse, which is a project by this brilliant group of people. They're called Verses, they're a collective. They also created the Declaration of Interdependence of Cyberspace, as opposed to the Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace, which is the classic calling to like what the internet could be, which was written by John Perry Barlow, I think over 30 years ago. But I would definitely check this page out, pluriverse.world. But it kind of goes into like the evolution of the internet and how we can reimagine the ways in which we fund, organize ourselves online. And so I think instead of a world where many worlds fit, it's a web where many webs fit, is I think the way I think about it. Where, yeah, I mean, we can recognize that something that we build, our ideas would be helpful for some people and might not be helpful for everybody, but somebody might even take your idea and adapt it and build off of it and run with it, right? But you can actually just make it useful to yourself and not assume that it will be useful for everybody else. So I think organizationally, the way that this works, and this is a term that I actually stole or borrowed or taking from Boris from a conversation we had, where we have projects and individuals working in collaboration to build interoperable, so you know, tools that work together, composable, that each like pieces of your technologies can be adapted and used by other projects, and free and open source. And so when you are at a smaller scale and you are working with other organizations, you have human-to-human connection within your organization. You can have better maybe compensation models, governance models, et cetera. But you aren't reliant on this like mega organization that could crumble and, you know, and oftentimes doesn't really care about their workers. But I'll talk a little bit more about all of that. So commons, like where does that come from? Eleanor Ostrom was the first female Nobel Prize winner for economics, and she won her Nobel Prize for her research on common pool resources. So she came up with these like 8 principles for commoning, things like having clearly defined boundaries for who has access to the commons. What else? Having effective monitoring, so making sure that there's some kind of like oversight over how the commons is being used. I'm gonna just open my app so I know how much time I have left. Okay. And that they have self-determination, so the community that is both stewarding and using the commons has their own right to make the rules. So in a way, I've kind of distilled those 8 principles that she had from her research and into these 3 approaches. And so whenever I'm working on a project, I really strive to go through, kind of like remind myself that these are the tactics that are necessary. So the first is defining shared values. The second is building culture of trust and mutual respect. And finally, establish clear boundaries around labor. So let's go through these. So defining shared values. So I think it's really important to communicate upfront what you believe in with other people that you're working on. So like your friends or even like your partners, right? Like let's use the dating example, right? Like you are dating somebody and you're like trying to understand like what does this person care about? What do they like to do for fun? What is not acceptable, right? And like you are building a relationship based on like common values. So then, you're way less likely to fight. You're way more likely to enjoy each other's company and, just do more and more things. And so I think the same thing really needs to be true for organizations, right? And I think for a lot of us, we end up having to work, we have to look for a job, we end up going to a company that, hopefully most of our values are aligned, but it's not always really aligned. So if you're fortunate to create a project with other people, to really like have a good conversation about, okay, like, why are we doing this project? Like what kinds of things do we care about? Like, maybe having salary, compensation, transparency, or yeah, like making sure we have good vacation policy, life, work balance, things like that. And having that all up front is going to be so much more helpful, both for you to work well within your team, but then if you're working with other teams, to be able to say, okay, these are what we stand for. We're not actually going to be okay with anyone who's like, harassing somebody or is discriminating against somebody. And like putting your principles forward allows you essentially to create like interoperable working relationships with other organizations. So as an example, so this is DWeb Camp, which I think was maybe mentioned. But this is a camp that's been going on with the Internet Archive since 2019. This was at the Mushroom Farm near Pescadero. It's been going on in Navarro, 2 hours north of San Francisco for the last couple of years. And we just bring together people who are builders, organizers, researchers, artists, everything in between, who really want to build better digital networks. And so after our first camp in 2019, a few of us were like, hey, we should really think about what it is that we stand for besides just saying decentralized web. Like, what the hell does that mean? Like, that's not centralized. Like, what do we actually stand for? And so we started to do these exercises to identify exactly what that meant. And during like the worst of the pandemic in 2020, 2021, my co-collaborator and I, John Ryan, who came from Google X and has had a long history in Silicon Valley, came from very different background from me. We were like, okay, let's like come up with this document. And so we came up with these DWeb principles, which took about a year of convening, drafting, reformulating over many drafts. So essentially it is to define what we think a decentralized web can be, And we are very clear that this is like a very subjective set of beliefs. We're not imposing this on everybody in the world, but we're saying like, this community DWeb, this is what we stand for. You're either like down for this, or if you're not, cool, do your own thing. It's great. So the first one is technology for human agency. Each of these have these subpoints in them. I'm not going to read all of them because that would take all day. But the first principle is we stand for technology that enables the primacy of people as people as beneficiaries of the technology by upholding their security, privacy, and self-determination. We urge coexistence and interoperability and discourage walled gardens. We value open source code as a fundamental building block of an open and inclusive web. So it goes on and on like that. But I'm just gonna breeze through these. So the second one is distributed benefits. We believe that decentralized technologies will be most beneficial to society when the rewards and recognitions of their success, monetary or otherwise, are distributed among those who contributed to that success. So this is kind of recognizing that, again, much of what we experience with the internet is very extractive, and we don't see the benefits, profit or otherwise. And so we think that that should actually go back into the community. Mutual respect. We support and encourage clear codes of conduct to ensure respectful and behavior of accountability. So, having participants remain mindful of their speech and behavior, etc. Empower people, aka humanity. The objective of building a decentralized web is to protect human rights and empower people, especially those who experience systemic inequality and prejudice. And the final one, ecological imperatives, which is actually called ecological awareness. Currently, it's not the greatest name. I think it's too weak, but it should be ecological imperatives. We believe projects should aim to minimize ecological harm and avoid technologies that worsen environmental health. So yeah, so those are the principles that we carry through our events. We also list other principles that we think are worth checking out, that we stand alongside, to say that this isn't just one approach to building commons networks or decentralized webs. Okay, so the second one, build a culture of trust and mutual respect. So really it is about just making sure people feel safe and enjoy themselves when they're working with other people, which seems really basic, but is not actually the case at a lot of companies. So, with DWeb Camp, we're always very clear about our code of conduct. We have a code of conduct team, which is awesome. And we just want to make sure people feel comfortable when they're, outside and talking to each other. And yeah, now we have about 500 people coming to our camps, and people seem to have a really great time in the forest talking about digital networks. And I think a large part of that is just making sure that we are clear about what is the kind of behavior that we're, hoping to cultivate in the space. So I think one other example I'd like to give is the contributor covenant. This is a code of conduct for open source communities, which many of you might already be familiar with, written by Coraline Ada Emke. It's been adopted apparently by over 100,000 open source projects around the world, including really big companies like Airbnb and BBC to Node.js and, a lot of projects. And really the purpose of this was to reduce the harassment of minorities, LGBTQ folks, and underrepresented programmers in open source. This is a little code of conduct that I just saw in a cafe like yesterday for our community space in Glendale called Junior High. And what I love about it is, I don't know if you can read that actually. I'm having a hard time reading on my screen, but what I love about this is the last column, which is, it's called growth and accountability. And it just has pieces about like, hey, sharing your own personal experience can be vulnerable and difficult. Try not to, disagree with them if it doesn't completely align with your own. And being called in is an opportunity. So when people are saying, hey, I didn't really like that behavior, this is what I think, don't try and act defensively, like take that as like a learning experience. So I think a lot of codes of conduct are seen as like you know, very, what's the word, like, um, oh, I'm totally getting a blank, but like, yeah, just creating like enemies or something, or drawing a really hard line. But I think it's actually a way for people to actually like understand how to share space together better. Okay, yeah, so the last one, establish clear boundaries around labor. I think this is pretty obvious. So many free and open source projects rely on volunteerism, which has led out to burnout. And I think that in organizations, when you don't make compensation upfront clear with everybody, then it just really benefits the people who are making the most money in that organization. If that's not true, prove me wrong, but I've seen that in every organization that I've been part of. Compost is the magazine that I'm the editor of. We are always just very upfront about how much we pay our contributors, like in the very beginning. If we're like asking people to do more work, we're like, okay, this is gonna cost, we're gonna pay you this much to do this. That's very embedded in our ethos. Our third issue, Water Bodies, came out last year. If you'd like to check it out, it's compost.digital. We also have some stickers out on the table out there. The big time license, Boris actually just told me about this yesterday over lunch, but this is a open source license that is kind of pushing back against the ways in which open source code bases are getting exploited by, you know, companies and companies that aren't, you know, contributing back in any way. And so, for instance, I don't think I copied over my notes, but I think it was like, if your company is over 20 people, if you make more than $1 million worth of income in a year, then you have to, you know, contribute back. But otherwise it's an open license. So it's like a very permissive license unless you are profitable and if you're a big company. And so I think these types of licenses are really helpful in recognizing that maintaining the commons takes a lot of work. So yeah, so just to recap, define your shared values, build culture of trust, mutual respect, and establish clear boundaries around labor. And I think, obviously, there's a lot more you can do, but I think these are really important for making healthier organizations, for them to work together and build more decentralized and interoperable, composable, free and open source network technologies. And yeah, and so, I mean, I really just want to emphasize that we're here today connecting like this. And this is, I think, like the, I would say like primordial soup of digital commons networks for them to emerge so that we can get to know each other and trust each other and understand what we're trying to do. And I think human to human, face to face interactions like this, like you just cannot trade that away for, you know, for building better organizations. And so I think all of this leads to just this idea of transformative solidarity. If we are better to ourselves individually, if we're better within our organizations, if we're better organizations to each other, I think we can work in solidarity with other people and other projects that, you know, we might not 100% agree with, or just, you know, don't do the same things, but we can work together to try and make our networks better. And just gonna leave you with a few quotes. I just read this article by Astrid Taylor and Leah Hunt Hendricks, who just came out with a book, Solidarity, the Past, Present, and Future of a World-Changing Idea. Real organizing is a kind of alchemy, a process that turns alienation into connection, despair into dedication, and oppression into strength, while fashioning a whole that is stronger than its parts. And this other quote by the late David Graeber, I just constantly remind myself of this quote, which I love, is the ultimate hidden truth of the world is that it's something that we make and could just as easily make differently. And I think we should just remind ourselves that, you know, no matter how fucked up things are, things can be different and we can make and build new worlds. And I think oftentimes, like sometimes personally, I feel very small and very big at the same time. Like I just feel like small and helpless and like, what am I supposed to do on my own? But then I also feel really big and then I just feel like I have so much responsibility to try and fix all the things. And so really what it's about in using transformative solidarity tactics is to find other people that you want to do things with and change things together. So I'll just leave you with the fact that our next UO camp is August 7th through 2024. Our ticketing is gonna go up hopefully in the next couple of weeks. We're working on it. And we have virtual meetups that are ongoing. And so I hope you can make it. If you have any questions about DWeb Camp or anything, please ask me. And that's it. Thank you.